Now it's time for today's perspective, and as part of our coverage for International Day for the elimination of violence against women, we're going to talk in perspective today to a woman who is leading the fight to end female genital mutilation and helping women who suffer from it as well. Leyla Hussein is a psychotherapist specialising in supporting survivors of sexual abuse. She's founder as well of the Dahlia Project. It's the UK's first specialist therapeutic service for FGM survivors, and also Magul, an organisation that promotes the well-being of women who've undergone or are at risk from FGM. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme today. I'd like to start off by talking about your own experiences first. You underwent FGM at the age of just 7 in Somalia, where you were born.
Yes, so just to give a bit of a context, I'm originally from Somalia, and sadly, I was subjected to this violence at the age of 7. And I think something that people need to, there's a misunderstanding that this happens to uneducated people. I come from a privileged background in Somalia, both parents educated, grandparents were educated. But again, I want to use the right language by calling it subjected to this violence.
But it was seen as normal?
Unfortunately, at the time, it was seen as the norm, but it wasn't just, it was part of your identity, not just normal, but it was part of your identity. And you will not be considered to be part of society if you haven't been subjected to this. You can't be seen as someone who could be marriageable. I mean, I remember my first experience of going to school in Somalia for the first time. I remember the kids saying, have you undergone gudnin, which is in Somali FGM, and they said, and I said, I've just undergone this. And I remember her shouting to everybody saying, we can now play with her.
And then you moved to the UK, didn't you, when you were 12? But it was a long time, wasn't it, before you realised what you'd been subjected to? I mean, you'd heard people talking about FGM, but you didn't realise that's what happened to you. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it really, for me, no one ever spoke about it. I mean, you can imagine, right? A group of people you trust pin you down to a table, spread your legs apart, and violently cut parts of your body. No one speaks about it ever again. So for me, this really came to the surface when I gave birth to my daughter. It was during the pregnancy where I was having real difficulties, not necessarily physically, but really psychological flashbacks during that time. It was only a nurse who had real serious, who had training around this, who finally asked me when my daughter was 3 months, can I just check, Ms. Hussein, that you're obviously from this part of the world, can I just check you've undergone this violence? And my response was yes, but I didn't have the worst type. And quickly she tells me it was actually illegal in the UK, which I had no clue it was illegal in the UK.
So how difficult has that been then to come to terms with?
It's, I'm not going to lie to you. I grew up in Britain most of my life. Sadly, in Britain, I hardly knew about my body. So there's a whole question mark around our education system, because I didn't even know which part of my body that was supposed to be there, right? So that's one thing. You go through anger, frustration, and just being angry that you were left behind. Again, there was no support system in place, but just I think just now knowing that what I've experienced was violence and it was torture. I think, again, for me, reframing this is so important, and actually not being framed as a form of culture, because I think that's why there was so much silence around this, because people are scared to challenge cultures and traditions.
And what's great, though, is that you've been able to turn it around. I mean, there's so many organisations you've been involved in. I've talked about the Dahlia Project. I talked as well about Magul. There's also the Girl Generation. Tell us what these all are and why you wanted to be a part of them and found them.
Yeah, so the Girl Generation is actually a program founded by the UK, which is funded by the UK government. I'm currently the Global Advocacy Director based here in Nairobi, but we work in other African countries, including Ethiopia, Senegal, and Somaliland. I mean, the aim for us really is to really show the seriousness of this issue, for one, because we need to reframe the language, because, again, when we talk about this issue, we keep referring to it as practice. Clearly, what we are discussing is actually violence against children. And there's been a recent data from University of Birmingham, which clearly states is it's the fourth biggest killer of African girls. Every 12 minutes, a girl will be dying, sadly, from this violence. So really our work is to advocate and ensure the current African movement gets the resources it needs, the support it needs. So that's really the current work I'm doing here in Africa. And obviously part of that work is also working with survivors who are also on the front line of these movements.
And it's not just Africa as well, it's the UK too.
Absolutely. There's a massive connection between the diaspora community and the community here in Africa. And also, I just also want to mention, FGM is a global issue. We know now FGM is an issue in the Middle East, Asia. I recently met women from Colombia who have also, this is now a big issue. So I think it's important to recognize this is a global issue that we're dealing with. But the UK is a massive issue. We know that. And I'm really happy that, we can finally bring this back on people's radar again, because Christmas is coming up. And this is really a time where girls are taken away to the origin countries where their families are from, to be, and I'm going to say this, to be subjected to this violence.
And you also help a lot of women, don't you, who have been subjected to the violence, presumably in emotional support is the crucial issue.
Absolutely. I mean, anyone who's gone through any form of violence, it's important that we provide emotional, psychological support. In the work that we're doing here with the girl generation, that's absolutely critical in terms of the work that we're doing, because again, the survivors like myself, we still don't exist in a world where this is even recognized as violence. So part of our emotional support work and to have that safe space is to recognize this a violence that we experience as children. So this is a form of child abuse that we are dealing with. So that space, that safe space, is absolutely critical, and it's part of our big healing. But that also leads to prevention, right? I made sure my daughter was protected from all forms of violence. She's 22 now, but just having that little bit of information, knowing that it was illegal in the UK, that I knew I had a health professional I could go to, but I was one in thousands of women who unfortunately cannot access that service.
It's an issue that never used to be talked about. I mean, at least it's being talked about. At least there are people like yourselves trying to do something about it. But do you think it'll ever get to the stage where it's eliminated?
People ask me this question all the time. It's like asking, will rape ever be eliminated, right? FGM is, I hope it gets eliminated, but before I think we can even explore that idea, the system in place has to be changed. We need to have a better health system for women who've undergone FGM, better prevention systems, ongoing funding from government, better justice system. I mean, we know FGM is illegal everywhere in the world. The issue has been prosecution. Again, is what I said at the beginning. We need to reframe the language on how we address, because language has such an impact on how we deal with an issue. So if hopefully from today, anyone who hears me speaking recognizes this as violence, it's child abuse, and it's a form of sexual assault. Touching a child's genitalia is a form of sexual assault. You put a weapon to that, it's a serious sexual assault. So I'm hoping by beginning to reframe this now, we can deal with this differently, where we have a better justice system and a better health system. And I think then we can have the conversation, is this ever going to be eradicated? Because for me, I can't even think of that at the moment, because we can't even name it for what it is.
Leyla Hussein, great to talk to you on the programme today. Thank you very much. Leyla Hussein then, as I mentioned, founder of the Dahlia Project, also Magul and the Girl Generation as well.